Sam Nujoma, Namibia's founding president, died in February 2025 at the age of 95. For once, the story didn't come wrapped in bitterness, lawsuits, or arguments over where the body should be buried. In fact, it was the kind of farewell that most African leaders would kill for, which, given the continent's track record, isn't entirely metaphorical. Unlike the fractured mourning of Zimbabwe, Namibia's send-off looked suspiciously like what nations imagine when they say national unity. Nuyoma's coffin wasn't smuggled around courtrooms or hidden from rivals. It was carried to Heroes Acre in Windhoek with dignity. Flags waving, songs swelling, and actual tears that weren't forced by state security agents. Mourners weren't dragged from combis and herded to stadiums. They came willingly. Thousands. Ordinary peasants, students, dignitaries from as far as South Africa, including Cyril Ramaphosa, who briefly put aside load-shedding woes to remind Namibians that they at least knew how to bury their founding father with pride. Former President Nangolo Mbumba called Nujoma the most distinguished son of the soil. Normally, that phrase sounds like generic funeral filler, but in this case, it landed. Nuyoma's soil wasn't stained by massacres, wasn't mortgaged to Chinese loan sharks, and wasn't soaked in debt defaults. Instead, it was soil wrestled from the apartheid occupation through SWAPO's guerrilla war and then stitched into a new national identity. Yes, Namibia has its problems: unemployment, corruption, inequality. But compared to the basket cases around it, the place looks like an overachiever. And much of that credit flows back to Nuyoma's legacy. It's not that Namibians ignored his flaws. He wasn't a saint. Some feel he overstayed his welcome with a third term, built a party so dominant that opposition politics still look like an after-school club. But here's the difference. When Nujoma left office, Namibia didn't collapse. The currency didn't become toilet paper, the streets weren't on fire, and no one had to exile the corpse to Singapore. For once in African history, the phrase smooth transition wasn't a cruel joke. So when Nujoma died, the nation actually grieved. Artists released songs in his name, like Dr. Sam Nujoma by Nam Gospel United, not propaganda tracks that vanish after state funerals, but genuine tributes that ordinary Namibians shared with pride. People cried because they remembered a man who started as a cattle herder, lived long enough to defeat Pretoria's apartheid army, and still had the humility to eat pap at homesteads. The story wasn't corrupted by unresolved vendettas. It was the rare African funeral where the past didn't arrive to demand repayment. Compare that to Zimbabwe. Mugabe's ghost still stalks fuel queues and election rallies. In Zambia, Edgar Lungu's corpse is literally a hostage in the quarrel between his family and his enemies. But Namibia? The day of Nuyoma's burial looked like the impossible dream. A country able to put politics aside long enough to remember a leader fondly. That doesn't mean everyone was blind. Younger Namibians still complain that SWAPO hasn't delivered jobs, that corruption remains, that leaders use the liberation struggle like an ATM of legitimacy. But Nuyoma's death became a pause button on the complaints. For a moment, even critics admitted this man earned his place at Heroes Acre. He fought apartheid, he won independence, and unlike so many African rulers, he didn't turn his liberation credentials into a lifetime of dictatorship. The cynic's truth is that Namibians weren't just mourning Nujoma. They were mourning the idea that leaders like him are now extinct. In a continent where founding father usually translates into eternal tyrant, Namibia had one who stepped aside, lived long, and left behind more progress than chaos. That's why the unity was real. Not manufactured, not forced, real. And here's the kicker. That unity didn't come from endless slogans or myth-making. It came from something far more radical. Results. Nuyoma's Namibia managed 35 years of relative stability, a functioning welfare system, and an identity that didn't dissolve into tribal blood feuds. When the man died, the nation didn't split into factions over whether to call him a hero or a butcher. They called him a father. And for once, it didn't feel like propaganda. So yes, Nuyoma's funeral was a symphony of flags, hymns, and praise poems. But beneath the surface, it was also a mirror showing Namibians what it feels like when a leader actually delivers something worth mourning. A mirror reminding the region that political death doesn't have to be a curse, that sometimes, very rarely, it can be closure. Namibia gave the continent an uncomfortable lesson. Unity is possible, but only if leaders live in service rather than in appetite. Nuyoma did. That's why his grave is a place of reverence, not whispered bitterness. And that's why 6 months later, Namibians still hum the songs, not because they're told to, but because they want to.